The last thing I remember seeing before the world went black was my son's face, his handsome, familiar face, smiling down at me with a look of gentle, pitying resolve as he locked the old storm shed door from the outside. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Carol. My name is Carol Miller. I am 78 years old, and I'm speaking to you today from a little town in coastal Florida. Though, for my entire life, up until 2 years ago, I was a farmer's wife from the rolling plains of Iowa. This story, my goodness, this is a hard one. This is the story that lives in the dark part of my heart, the part I don't visit very often. It's a secret that I have kept buried deeper than any winter frost could ever reach. Even my own sister, God rest her soul, never knew the whole, unvarnished truth. How do you find the words for it? How do you tell the world that your own child, your only son, the boy you raised with these 2 hands, the boy you would have laid down your very life for, drugged you and locked you away in a dirt-floored shed like a sick animal? The shame of it. It's a living thing. For the longest time, I thought it was my shame, my failure. I would lie awake at night and ask myself, what did I do wrong? Where did I fail him? How does a mother's love curdle into something so monstrous in a child's heart? You see, you begin to believe their story, the story they tell themselves, and the story they tell the world. That you are burdened, that you are confused, that your mind is failing, and that their cruelty is a kindness, a necessary, painful, but ultimately loving act. It is the most dangerous lie in the world. And it almost destroyed me. I am telling this story now because I am finally done with the shame. I have learned that his cruelty was his, and his alone. And I am telling it for anyone out there who has ever been made to feel small, who has been made to feel like a problem to be solved by the very people who should be their safe harbor. Before I begin this journey back into that darkness, I would be so very grateful for your support. Please, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your kindness, your simple act of bearing witness to an old woman's story, it is a great comfort. It feels like a hand reaching out in the dark, and it gives me the strength to finally unlock that shed door in my memory and let the truth, in all its ugliness, see the light of day. Thank you, my dears. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. My story, the happy part, the part that now feels like a beautiful, faded dream, began on 160 acres of black, fertile Iowa soil. It began with my husband, my John. He was not a complicated man. He was a farmer. He was a man made of soil and sunshine and quiet, unshakable integrity. He was born on this land, as was his father before him. The farm, Blackwood Farm, wasn't just his job. It was his heart, his soul, his legacy. Our life was not an easy one, but it was a good one. It was a life dictated by the seasons, by the sun and the rain. It was a life of early mornings and long, aching days, of the smell of turned earth in the spring and the sweet scent of hay in the summer. It was a life of shared burdens and simple, profound joys. A good harvest, a healthy calf, a summer storm that broke a long drought. We weren't just husband and wife. We were partners, in the truest sense of the word. He was the strength, and I was the heart. He worked the land, and I worked the home. Our little farmhouse, the one his grandfather had built, was always filled with the smell of baking bread, of coffee percolating on the stove, of clean laundry drying on the line. We didn't have much money, but we were rich in all the ways that truly mattered. We had one child, our son, our David. Oh, he was our golden boy. The sun rose and set on him. He had his father's handsome face and my stubborn chin. He was the center of our small, hard-working world. Every hope, every dream, every prayer we had was for him. He was not just our son. He was the future of Blackwood Farm, the next link in the chain. I can still feel the weight of his small hand in mine as we would walk out to the garden to pick beans for dinner. I can still see the dusting of flour on his nose the summer I taught him how to make my apple pie, his little hand so clumsy and earnest as he tried to crimp the crust. I remember the fierce, aching pride I felt watching him on his father's lap on the big green John Deere tractor, his small hands on the giant steering wheel, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated joy. He was a good boy, a happy boy. He loved this land. He loved us. I never, not for a single solitary second, doubted the goodness in his heart. His father and I, we were determined to give him more than we had. Not just the farm, but an education. We saved every penny. We went without so that he could have. He was smart, our David. He did well in school. But he was a dreamer. He had a restlessness about him, a yearning for a world beyond our cornfields. He wanted to go to college, to study business. His father was hesitant. "Everything a man needs to know, he can learn from the land, Carol," he would say to me in the quiet of the evenings. But I pushed for it. I wanted my son to have choices I never had. So we sent him. We used our life savings to send him to the state university. And that is where our world, our safe, simple, beautiful world, began to crack. It was a crack so small at first, you would have missed it if you weren't looking. A hairline fracture in the foundation of the boy we thought we knew. It was there that he met Linda. And it was there that the son we had raised began to slowly, imperceptibly disappear, replaced by a stranger we did not recognize until it was far, far too late. David came home from his first year of college a slightly different person. The change was subtle, a small shift in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke. He had a new way of talking, a quicker, more confident cadence, and he was full of new ideas, new words. He spoke of marketing strategies and brand identity and return on investment. He looked at our farm, the farm he had once loved, with a child's simple joy, with new, appraising eyes. "You know, Dad," he said one evening, as we all sat on the porch, "the farm is an asset, a huge asset. But it's an underperforming one. We should be thinking about diversification, about leveraging the equity." My John had just smiled, a slow, kind, and slightly amused smile. "The only equity I'm interested in, son, is the sweat equity I put into that field every day," he'd said. "And the only return I'm looking for is a good, healthy crop come September." David had just shaken his head, a look of fond, pitying condescension on his face. The look of a man who believes he is speaking a language his simple, old-fashioned parents cannot possibly understand. He was not a bad boy. He was just dazzled. Dazzled by a world of easy money and quick success, a world so different from the slow, patient, and often brutal world of farming he had grown up in. He was a boy caught between two worlds, and I could feel him slowly, inexorably, being pulled towards the shinier, more exciting one. And then, during his senior year, he brought Linda home. And she was, from the very first moment, perfect. Utterly, disarmingly, and completely perfect. She wasn't like the other girls he had dated, girls who were often intimidated by the quiet, hard-working nature of our lives. Linda was a farm girl herself, from a small town a few hours away. Or so she said. She walked into my kitchen, looked at the pot of stew simmering on the stove, and she breathed in deeply, a look of pure, nostalgic joy on her face. "Oh my goodness, Carol," she said, her voice a warm, gentle melody. "I haven't smelled a real kitchen in years. It smells like my grandma's house." She was a masterpiece. She understood us, our world, our values, with a preternatural, intuitive grace. She complimented my cooking, but she did it while asking for the recipe. She admired my quilts, but she did it while running a hand over the stitches, asking me to teach her how to make them. She didn't just praise our life. She made it seem as though it was the life she had always been searching for. And she was magnificent with his father. She would sit with John on the porch swing for hours, listening to his stories about the land, about the old days. She would ask him intelligent, thoughtful questions about crop rotation, about soil health. She made him feel like the wisest, most interesting man in the world. And my David, my son, he was a man transformed. With Linda by his side, his restless, dissatisfied energy seemed to melt away, replaced by a new, confident calm. She was his anchor, his champion, his biggest admirer. She would look at him with an expression of such profound, unwavering adoration, as if he were the smartest, most capable man she had ever met. She didn't just love him, she believed in him. Or rather, she believed in the man she intended to mold him into. I fell in love with her, just as everyone else did. I thought my son had found his perfect partner, a woman who understood our world, but who could also help him navigate the new one he was so drawn to. I thought she was the bridge between his past and his future. I thought she was a blessing. I had no idea she was a predator of the most patient, most dangerous kind. A predator who had identified her prey and who was willing to spend years, if necessary, slowly, gently, and with the most loving smile, maneuvering him into a position where he would be completely and utterly dependent on her. They married a year after they graduated. They didn't want a big wedding. They wanted a simple one, here at the farm. Linda wore a simple, beautiful white dress and a crown of wildflowers she had picked from my own garden that morning. As I watched them say their vows under the old oak tree, my heart was so full of joy I thought it would burst. They moved into a small apartment in a town about an hour away. David got a job as a loan officer at a bank. Linda worked as a paralegal. They were a happy, hard-working, normal young couple. And their love for us, for the farm, seemed as strong as ever. They came home every single weekend. David would help his father with the chores. Linda would help me in the kitchen. They were the perfect devoted children. It was all a performance. A long, patient, and brilliantly executed performance. The first subtle shift, the first move in her long, quiet game, came after my John passed away. He died suddenly, a massive heart attack, while he was out mending a fence line. He was there 1 minute and gone the next. The grief was a tidal wave that shattered our world. And in the aftermath of that terrible, numbing shock, Linda was my rock. She was magnificent. She handled everything. The funeral arrangements, the endless stream of well-meaning neighbors, the mountains of paperwork. She was a pillar of calm, competent, and loving strength. "Carol, honey, you can't possibly deal with all this right now," she'd said, her voice full of a deep, sincere sympathy. "The will, the insurance, the bank accounts. It's a nightmare. Please, let me do this for you. I'm a paralegal. I understand this world. Let me take this burden off your shoulders. It's what John would have wanted." And I, lost in my grief, drowning in a sea of details I couldn't comprehend, I let her. I handed her the keys to my husband's financial fortress. I gave her power of attorney. I gave her control. I thought it was an act of kindness, an act of love. I did not realize it was the first and most critical move in her quiet, patient, and utterly ruthless plan of conquest. I had just willingly, gratefully, handed my enemy the map to my entire world. With Frank's financial life now firmly in her hands, Linda's campaign to prove my incompetence entered a new and far more terrifying phase. She was no longer just chipping away at my confidence. She was now actively, methodically, and with a chilling, smiling patience, trying to chip away at my health. Her weapon was my food. It began subtly. She was always such a wonderful cook, always insisting on preparing my meals. "You just sit, Carol," she'd say. "Let me take care of you." And I noticed that my food, while still delicious, began to make me feel strange. I was always tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that I couldn't shake. My mind felt foggy, my thoughts slow and sticky, like walking through mud. I thought it was just grief. I thought it was just old age, catching up with me all at once. I had no idea that my loving daughter-in-law, the perfect farm girl, was lacing my evening tea with a little something extra. Not a poison, never anything so crude. Just a little something to make me sleepier, a little something to make me more confused. A mild over-the-counter sleeping aid, perhaps, crushed into a fine powder. Just enough to reinforce the narrative she was so carefully building. Just enough to make me into the frail, fading woman she needed me to be. The Accidents also became more frequent and more serious. My husband, John, was a man who believed in safety above all else. Our house was a fortress of practicality. But under Linda's care, that fortress began to crumble. One afternoon, I was going down the steep wooden stairs to the basement to fetch a jar of my canned peaches. I had gone up and down those stairs 10,000 times in my life. But this time, my foot slipped on the third step from the top. I went tumbling down, crashing in a heap at the bottom, my ankle twisting beneath me with a sickening crack. The pain was a white-hot, blinding agony. I lay there, unable to move, until David and Linda found me. Linda, of course, was a perfect symphony of panicked, efficient care. She called the ambulance. She comforted a hysterical David. She calmly explained to the paramedics that I must have had a dizzy spell. At the hospital, they confirmed it. My ankle was broken in 3 places. I would be in a cast for months, unable to put any weight on it at all. As I lay in that hospital bed, a thought, a cold, terrible, and intrusive thought, kept trying to surface. The third step, the one I had slipped on. John had always said it was a little loose. He had been meaning to fix it for years. I had reminded David about it just a few months ago. When they brought me home, I asked David to look at the step. He came back from the basement, his face pale. The nail that had held the tread in place was not just loose, it was gone. It had been deliberately, carefully removed. When I looked at Linda, she just shook her head, her eyes full of a sad, pitying love. "Oh, Carol," she said softly. "You're just looking for someone to blame. You're confused. You had a fall. It happens to people your age." My son, my dear, weak son, believed her. It was easier to believe that his mother was getting old and clumsy than to believe that his perfect, loving wife was a monster. Now, I was truly trapped. I was an invalid in my own home. I was completely dependent on them for everything. My food, my medication, my every move. And Linda's care became suffocating. She was always there, hovering, her gentle smile never leaving her face. She would bring me my meals in bed. She would sort my new pain medication. And I grew weaker, foggier. The world became a dreamlike, terrifying haze. The final, brutal, and unforgivable act came on a hot, suffocating afternoon in late August. It was the day of the town's annual Founders' Day picnic, an event I had not missed in 50 years. I was still in a wheelchair, my ankle still healing, but I was determined to go. "Oh, Carol, I don't think that's a good idea," Linda said, her voice a soft, velvet hammer. "It's so hot, and you're still so weak. It would be too much for you." "I want to go," I said, my voice a stubborn, weak whisper. "I want to see my friends." She sighed, a long, patient, weary sigh. "Of course," she said. "If that's what you really want, let me just get you a nice, cool glass of lemonade first, and maybe one of your pain pills, so you'll be comfortable." She brought me the lemonade. It tasted a little strange, a little bitter, but I was thirsty, and I was tired of fighting. So I drank it, and she gave me my pain medication, and I took it. That's the last thing I truly remember. The world began to swim. The edges of the room went soft and dark. Linda's face, her beautiful, smiling, concerned face, was the last thing I saw before the world dissolved into a black, heavy, and terrifying nothingness. When I woke up, I was no longer in my comfortable bedroom. I was lying on a dusty, lumpy cot. The air was thick and hot and smelled of damp earth and rust and old, forgotten things. I tried to sit up, but my head was a universe of throbbing, agonizing pain. I looked around. I was in the old storm shed. It was a small, windowless, dirt-floored structure at the far edge of the property, a relic from 100 years ago. It was where we stored old tools, broken equipment. It was a place of spiders and mice and darkness. I stumbled to the door. It was made of thick, heavy wood. I pushed. It didn't budge. I pushed again, with all my strength. And then I saw it. On the outside of the door, a brand new, heavy, steel hasp and a thick, shiny brass padlock. I had not just been moved. I had been locked in. I began to scream. I screamed until my throat was raw. But no one came. No one could hear me. The shed was too far from the house, too far from the road. I was alone, buried alive. I don't know how long I was in there. A day? 2? Time ceased to have meaning. The world was a hot, black, terrifying box. And in that box, in that absolute soul-destroying despair, I finally understood. This was her solution. The final, perfect, loving act of care. She was not going to murder me. That was too risky. She was just going, let me die. An old, confused, and sick woman who had wandered out of the house in a daze and accidentally locked herself in an old shed. It would be a tragedy. A terrible, terrible accident. And they would be so devastated when they finally found me, days later. And then, with the life insurance payout, they would be free. As I lay on that dusty cot, in the suffocating darkness, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt a rage so pure, so absolute, so incandescent, it burned away the fog in my head. It burned away the despair. It burned away the weakness. She thought she had buried me. She thought she had won. But she had made one critical, arrogant mistake. She had forgotten about the one thing in the world she did not control. She had forgotten about my mind. And she had forgotten about the quiet, practical, and deeply knowledgeable woman my husband had spent 50 years creating. The game was not over. It had just moved to a new, and much deadlier, board. And I, the woman she had left for dead, was about to make my first move. Time in that shed ceased to be a line. It became a thick, black, suffocating pool that I was drowning in. Was it day? Was it night? I couldn't tell. The heat was a physical presence, pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. My broken ankle throbbed with a dull, insistent agony. My head felt like it was splitting open. And the thirst. My goodness, the thirst was a fire in my throat. I lay on that lumpy cot, and for a long time, I just gave in to the despair. It was a black, seductive wave, and it was so easy to just let it pull me under. They had won. She had won. She had been so patient, so clever. She had played the long game, and she had checkmated me. My life was over. I would die here, in the dark, a forgotten old woman in a forgotten shed, and my own son would weep at my funeral, never knowing the truth of the monster he had married. I thought about my John. I thought about the life we had built, the love we had shared, and I felt a shame so profound it was like a physical sickness. I had let him down. I had let this woman, this smiling, venomous creature, destroy everything he had worked so hard to protect. I had let her destroy me. I don't know how long I lay there, adrift in that sea of self-pity and despair. But then, something small happened. Something that changed everything. I felt a wet nose nudge my hand, and then a soft, warm tongue lapping at the salt on my skin. I had forgotten. In my drugged, terrified state, I had forgotten. I was not alone in that shed. She had made one small, critical, and ultimately fatal mistake. When she and my son had dragged my unconscious body out here, my old dog, my sweet Buster, had followed them, barking and whining. To shut him up, they had shoved him in here with me and padlocked the door. They thought he was just a dog, an old, useless farm dog. They didn't realize he was my heart. He was the last living piece of my John. And in that moment, as I felt his loyal, living warmth beside me in the darkness, the despair began to recede. And in its place, a fire started to burn. A cold, hard, and diamond-bright rage. The shame was gone. The self-pity was gone. And all that was left was the furious, unbending will of a woman who was not going to die in a dirt-floored shed. My mind, the mind that had been so foggy, so clouded by her drugs and her lies, began to clear. The panic subsided and was replaced by the calm, methodical, and practical mind of a farmer's wife. A woman who knew how to solve problems. A woman who knew how to survive. I took stock of my prison. The walls were thick, old-growth lumber. The door was a fortress. The padlock was new and strong. There was no escape. Not in a conventional way. But my John was a builder. And he was a farmer. And he had taught me that every structure has a weakness, and that the earth itself can be both a prison and a key. The floor was dirt. Hard-packed, dry Iowa dirt. But it was just dirt. I had no tools. I had only my hands. My old arthritic but still strong hands. And I began to dig. It was slow, agonizing work. The dirt was like stone. My fingernails broke. My hands bled. My broken ankle screamed with every movement. But the rage was a fuel that burned hotter than any pain. With every handful of dirt I clawed away, I was not just digging a hole. I was digging my way out of the grave she had put me in. I was digging my way back to the light. I was digging my way back to justice. I dug for hours. Or for days. I don't know. Time had no meaning. There was only the darkness, the pain, and the slow, steady work. I dug down, and then I dug sideways, towards the wall. I was not trying to go through the wall. I was trying to go under it. And then I felt it. My bleeding fingers hit something hard. Not a rock. Wood. A thick, buried piece of wood. It was the foundation beam. I had reached the edge. I dug around it, my heart hammering with a desperate, wild hope. And I found what I had been praying I would find. A gap. A small gap between the bottom of the old wooden wall and the top of the stone foundation it rested on. A gap caused by 100 years of the earth settling. A gap just big enough for a determined old woman and her very good dog to squeeze through. Crawling through that small dark hole was like being born again. I emerged from the darkness of the shed into the brilliant, blinding light of a new day. I was covered in dirt and blood and sweat. My ankle was a universe of pain, but I was alive, and I was free, and I was furious. My first act was not to call the police. That would be her word against mine. The word of a loving, concerned daughter-in-law against the word of a confused old woman who had wandered off and gotten herself trapped. No, too. A direct confrontation was a fool's game. I had learned that. My fight back would be quiet. It would be methodical. And it would be absolute. I limped my way back to the house. It was quiet. Empty. Their car was gone. They had, I assumed, gone to town to establish their alibi, to tell the story of the poor, confused mother who had tragically vanished. The house key was where it always was, under the loose brick by the back door. I let myself in. My house. My beautiful, beloved house. The one they had tried to make my tomb. I did not have much time. I had a shower. I cleaned and dressed the cuts on my hands. I wrapped my broken ankle tightly. And then I went to work. My husband was a practical man. He did not believe in banks, not really. He believed in the land. And he believed in cash. He had an emergency fund, a secret stash of money he kept for a true crisis. It was not in a safe. It was in the one place he knew no one would ever think to look. It was in the hollowed-out spine of an old, leather-bound copy of J. Moby Dick on the bookshelf in the den. I took the money. It was more than enough. My next stop was my closet. I packed a single, small suitcase. A few changes of clothes. My medication, my real medication. My husband's photograph. And the deed to the farm. And then I made a phone call. I called the one person in town I knew I could trust, a man who had been my husband's best friend since they were boys. A man who was also the shrewdest, toughest real estate lawyer in the entire county. "John," I said when he answered, "it's Carol Miller. I need your help. I want to sell the farm. And I need it done yesterday." Now, the trap was laid. The game had changed. They thought I was a pawn, a piece to be sacrificed. They had no idea I was the one who was about to clear the entire board. My husband's friend, John Randall, was a man cut from the same cloth as my own John. He was quiet, he was decent, and he had a deep and abiding hatred for bullies. He listened to my story, the whole unbelievable, sordid tale, without interruption. His kind, weathered face grew darker and harder with every word I spoke. When I was finished, when I told him about the padlock and the dirt floor and my old dog, Buster, he was silent for a long, long time. He just looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not pity, but a cold, furious, and deeply loyal anger. That boy always was too weak for his own good, he finally said, his voice a low rumble. And that wife of his, she's a viper. He looked at the deed on his desk. All right, Carol, you want to sell the farm. Let's sell the farm, and let's do it so fast it will make their heads spin right off their greedy shoulders. The plan we devised was a thing of beautiful, legal simplicity. It was a weapon, forged from my husband's foresight and my own quiet resolve. John Randall knew a man, a wealthy investor from Des Moines, who had been trying to buy up land in our county for years. A man who was known for his ability to close a deal with lightning speed and absolute discretion. My lawyer made one phone call. The man was in his office within 2 hours. He was a sharp, quiet man who didn't waste words. He looked at the farm's schematics. He looked at the deed. He looked at me. I'll pay cash, he said. Full asking price. We can close in 24 hours. And just like that, it was done. A lifetime of work, 160 acres of my family's history, was sold with a single handshake and the promise of a wire transfer. I felt a pang of deep, profound sadness. But it was overshadowed by the clean, cold, and deeply satisfying feeling of imminent justice. While the lawyers were drawing up the paperwork, I made my own preparations. I had one final performance to give. I went to the local bank. I withdrew every penny from my husband's joint savings account, the one that Linda, with her power of attorney, had been so carefully managing. And then I closed the account. I went to the post office, and I canceled the direct deposit of my Social Security checks. The well, the one they had been so confidently drinking from, was now, officially and permanently, dry. My final act was to write a letter. Not a long, angry, emotional letter. Just a simple, practical, and utterly devastating one. David, I wrote. I assume by now you have discovered that I am missing. I am sure you have put on a very convincing performance for the local sheriff. But I am not missing. I am safe. And I am, for the first time in a long time, free. You were right. The farm was a huge asset. And as the sole owner of that asset, I have decided to liquidate it. The sale closed this morning. The money is in a new private trust that you will not be able to find or to touch. I have also closed our bank accounts and canceled my Social Security deposits. I believe the final outstanding electric bill for the farm is for $87.14. I'm sure you and your clever wife will find a way to manage it. You left me to die in a shed, David. You, my son. You left me to die for money. I hope it was worth it. Because now you have nothing but the consequences of your own choices. Do not try to find me. I am no longer your mother. I am a ghost. And my haunting of your life has just begun. Me one. I didn't sign it with love. I just signed my name. Carol Miller. The next morning, I took a taxi to the bus station in the next town over. I bought a one-way ticket to a city I had never been to, in a state I had never seen. And as the bus pulled away from the station, leaving the rolling fields of Iowa behind me forever, I did not cry. I felt light. The weight of the farm, the weight of the memories, the weight of their greed. It was all gone. I was just an old woman in a new dress, with a sleeping dog at her feet and a cashier's check in her purse, heading towards the ocean. I can only imagine the chaos that erupted when my letter arrived. I can imagine their frantic calls to the bank, to the Social Security office. I can imagine the moment they realized that the well was dry. that the fortress had vanished, that their entire, comfortable, well-planned future had just evaporated into thin air. They lost everything. Without my money to prop them up, their own small mountain of debt, their car payments, their credit cards, it all came crashing down on them. They were evicted from their apartment. My investigator told me they were forced to move into a tiny, run-down place on the wrong side of town. Linda, the brilliant paralegal, had to take a second job, waitressing at night. And my son, my golden boy, the loan officer at the bank, was fired when the story of what they had done, a story that the buyer of my farm was not discreet about telling, became the gossip of our small county. I did not feel joy at their ruin. I just felt a quiet, somber sense of justice, of balance restored. They had tried to take my life for money. And in the end, all they were left with was a life that was not worth living. And me? I am happy. I have a small, quiet life. I have the sun and the sea and my good, loyal boy. I have my freedom. I have my peace. I have learned the hardest lesson a mother can ever learn, that sometimes the child you raised is gone forever, replaced by a stranger you do not know and do not owe, and that the only way to save yourself is to let them go. I learned that you must never, ever let anyone convince you that you are a burden. Your life, your mind, your strength, they are yours, and you are so much stronger than they could ever possibly imagine. They might think they can lock you in the dark, but they forget. A farmer's wife knows how to dig her way out. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a hard one to tell, but a necessary one. If you have found a little bit of strength in it, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on that little notification bell so you don't miss our next story. And in the comments below, please feel free to share a story about a time you found a strength you never knew you had. Love you all. This is Grandma Carol, and I'll see you in the next story.